Hello guys, bonjour. Aujourd'hui, je voulais vous donner la méthode que j'ai utilisée pour apprendre le français, comment j'ai appris le français et les matériaux que je voulais vous recommander. So I started learning French 5 years ago, and after 3 months, I could already converse with people and have fun with my language and not have to rely on English. So how did I do this? In this video, I want to tell you how I did it and also like the guidelines that I used in order to achieve this level, mistakes to avoid, what to focus on, and some materials that I want to recommend. My goal in learning any languages is to be able to talk to people as soon as possible. So the following is going to be how I would learn French if I were to start again from scratch. I would get a book, a 101 book, basic books, or sometimes it could be also courses online. And it's very important, super important, that it comes with an audio or listening materials, because it's easy to pick up incomprehensible accent if you were just reading and not listening and not copying the accent. So let me give you an example. Let's choose a short phrase like how to learn French. Comment apprendre le français? And in English, if you were to speak it with English accent, it would be comment apprendre le français. And this is not how it's supposed to be said, and I believe that most French people will not understand what you're saying. So some materials that I can recommend is French with Alexa. French with Alexa is a course. I recommend this one because it has a lot of listening material that you can use and you can copy the accent, and it's very systematic. So I recommend you using this material and get up to what she considers A2 level and then stop. After that, use real material, French material, because she's used a lot of English, and this might not be beneficial for people that want to practice and speak with foreigners, with native speakers fast. A book that I recommend is Hugo, French in 3 months, and you can buy that from Amazon, and you can also get a free listening material on YouTube, and I found it, and I'm going to put the link in the description. It's really good to go with this book, and which I used already. I really like how it's laid out. I feel like it's really well organized. But again, I want to stress the importance of using the listening materials, because if you're just reading the book, you will understand when you look at it, but you will never understand when people say it, because the sound and the writing doesn't really match. So the point of starting from basic books or courses is not to get to the last chapter. It's not to finish everything. It's to help you to have enough basics in order to go and talk to people as soon as possible. And right now I'm going to explain some guidelines, or actually you can call it like a check box that you have to go through and master in order to be able to talk to people and converse with people. Number 1, besides going through the 101 book or course that I just mentioned, the first thing that you should focus on are the most common verbs, irregular and regular, but pay special attention to irregular verbs, because these are verbs that doesn't follow a pattern and you have to memorize them. I recommend you to memorize them, because it's easier to memorize them than to absorb them automatically. Like the verb avoir, which is to have. If you want to conjugate it to I have, you have, he has, she has, something, it will become j'ai, tu as, il a, nous avons, vous avez, ils ont. See, it's like totally different. So don't try to absorb it naturally. Just memorize them. Verbs like to be, être, to go, aller. See, these are verbs that you will use every day. That's why you have to really have it engraved in your brain. So some of you guys might be like, what? There's so many words to memorize. How can I memorize everything? Actually, it's not that difficult. Usually just exactly like in Spanish, Portuguese, and I believe in Italian as well, you have the most common words that I use, verbs that I use, and they are irregular. Roughly 20 verbs. So if you memorize just 20 verbs that are the most used and the most irregular, then after that they all follow the same pattern and you will not have any problem. Aside from irregular verbs, there are also regular verbs, which are easier because they follow a specific pattern. So it's important to learn how to conjugate them as well. It's easy to find this list of words. You can just type in Google like 20 most common irregular verbs in French or 50 most common regular verbs in French. So what about words like school, dog, table, chair, something like that? They are also important because in order to create sentences, you need to know words and also verbs. But they are easier to memorize and you don't need to conjugate them. That's why in this section, I only say focus on verbs. Number 2, conjunctions and questions. You need to learn all the conjunction words like and, because, if, therefore, so. All those words are very important to connect sentences. Like, let's take an example. I love French language. Period. I learn French language. If you just connect it with a period, it's going to be two separated points. And it's like kindergarten way to form a sentence. But if you just put the word because, then it will make more sense. I learned French because I love French. J'apprends le français parce que j'aime le français. The question words are like, who, what, why, when, where, how, what time, and so on. These are very important because you want to be able to ask people questions, you want to be able to understand their questions. And also, another thing is in French, there's 3 ways of questioning people, of making question. Like the first way is to change the intonation, or like tu veux parler le français, you want to speak French, with just putting the tone up, or using est-ce que tu veux parler le français, do you want to speak French? And also the last way is the inversion. All this stuff are very important for you to learn and master. Number 3, tenses and grammars. When we talk about tenses in French language, it sounds very difficult, it sounds like it's a lot. But actually, you know what? You just need to know 4 tenses in order to talk to people, in order to have your first conversation with people. So what are those tenses that you need to know? The first tense is I am tense, which is what you call present tense. And the past tense, the 2 important past tense is I did and I used to tense. And another tense is I'm going to tense, like I'm going to do, I'm going to eat tense. These are the 4 tenses that if you know, you'll be able to talk with people. And regarding grammars, the grammars that you will find in basic books that will cover like to compare things, like this is bigger than that, or like possessive, like my mom, my dad, ma mère, mon père, or negations, like je ne veux pas, I don't want, something like that. These are stuff that you need to make sure that you have them checked. Some of you might be asking, so what about the I have had, or I would have done that, or this tenses? Actually, you can learn that afterward, like in the future. You don't have to start now. Now we're talking about how to speak to people as soon as possible. And actually, you know what? The more you know in French, the harder it is to speak, because the tenses and French grammar is really complicated. And if you focus a lot on grammar, then you will get stuck when you want to speak. So I really recommend not learning too deep before you start speaking with people. Number 4, learn the words that used to describe your routine. These are words like I take a bath, I comb my hair, I change my clothes. Why these words? It's because those words are mostly reflexive. Reflexive are words that are like reflected. Let me give you an example, okay? Like, let's say, je m'appelle Grace. Je m'appelle, you guys know this word as, my name is Grace. But actually, literally, it is, I call myself Grace. Another word is, je me lave. I wash myself. Means I take a shower. Je me lave. Can you see the me? Let's take one more. Je me lève. Means I wake up. It's kind of like I wake myself up. Because if you don't have the me right there, it will be I wake somebody up. So that's why it's called reflexive. And most of the words that are used to describe your daily routine are reflexive. And reflexive are an important part of French language. And they are a bit difficult because they don't have the equivalent in English. So you should really know how to say that. Some of the reflexive verbs are already in the word itself. For example, je m'amuse. Like, I have fun. Alright, so with all these 4 points, what can you do? The first thing you can do after mastering or knowing these 4 points to some good level is to write your own story. Now, you already know how to talk about basic stuff. You know basic grammars. You know the 4 most important tenses. You know how to describe your routines. You know how to combine sentences. You know how to ask questions and how to answer them. So now it's time to write a story that is related to you. It's not a story about Mr. John or Mrs. Smith or somebody else, but it's your story. This story is very important because this is going to be the base that you use for the first conversation with a native speaker. In order to write a good story, you will need help from Google Translate or real human, like that might be your friend or people that you can find online that know how to speak French very, very well, or native speakers. For me, myself, I like to use italki. It's a platform where I can find a lot of teachers that can help me with my text, maybe correct my mistakes or do recordings for the text that I created. I'm going to put a link in the description if you want to check it out. So, alright, at this point, you should already get to a level where you can form a good sentence, long sentences which is connected by conjunctions. You should be able to ask questions. You should be able to use all the 4 tenses with ease. You should know all the important, common, frequently used verbs, irregular, regulars. You should know how to use reflexive verbs. You should be able to talk about your own routine. You should be able to talk about yourself. When I studied French, this took me about 2 months-ish. But I studied a lot, and I studied at least 4 hours every single day. So for some of you, this might take longer, but that's fine. But the point is that when you get to this point in time, where you know all the things that I just talked about, you should let go of the books that you're studying or the course that you're studying, you're following, and go on with the real material. So now I don't want you to study with a French, learn French through English. I don't want you to learn French through English anymore. I want you to learn French through French. One of the resources that I used and I think worked for me was the 7 rules of French authentique. Les 7 règles de français authentique. And these are the series of how to learn French videos. So this video is created by French Authentic. The owner is Johan, and he has this 7 videos explaining how to learn French. The videos has the topic inside, how the repetition, how to learn through context, and some tips about learning languages. I really like this 7 videos because it has a transcript. You can study with the transcript first if you don't understand anything. And I'm sure that this video, if you just started learning French, will be too hard for you. And too hard means it's good for you because this one will help you to improve tremendously. So study the transcript and then study the video. Learn the vocabs that keep repeating itself. Like for example, since this is a topic about learning languages, the word that will appear very often would be apprendre, to learn. There will be the word le français, French, and words like écouter, to listen, something like that. Now I want to give you some tips to learn French. The first tip that I have for you is that reading is so much easier than listening and understanding. Because of the similarities between English and French, you can guess the meaning of words. So that's why when you want to learn French, when you want to read French, you should be also listening at the same time. So I recommend reading the transcript while listening to it. Tip 2. When you get to a certain level where you know all the basics and you can talk about yourself, I really recommend using authentic material. So only French only material. So not French explained through English. Those can be podcasts, can be videos on YouTube with the subtitle, with a transcript. So at this level is around A2 level. One material that I recommend is material created by Inner French. So the creator is Hugo. He has a very good course for A2 level. So go check it out. I'm going to put the link in the description. Tip 3. Find people to talk to. If you want to speak French well, you need to speak with people. So you can find a friend, somebody online to talk to. And me personally, I like to use people in italki or those conversation teachers to talk with me, to help me express myself and correct my mistakes. The last tip that I have for you, and which is the 4th tip, is really work on your accents. There's something about French language that if you don't speak them correctly, according to the French accent, it's difficult to understand. And a lot of French people might not be able to understand you. So I want to really focus on this point. The next thing I want to talk about is mistakes to avoid. The first mistake to avoid is caring too much about the writings. Like, for example, the word je parle, tu parles, il parle. I speak, you speak, they speak. Sound exactly the same, but they're written differently. There are many words in French that are like that, but you don't have to memorize because, like, for example, the word I want, je veux. There's an X at the back, but you don't pronounce it. You don't have to write them correctly, but if you can pronounce them correctly, that is the most important at this stage. The second mistake to avoid is learning too much grammar at the beginning before you start speaking. Like I told you, you just have to memorize the 4 tenses: the I am, the I used to, the I did, and the I'm going to, in order to speak to people. But actually there's so many more tenses, like I have had, I would have, something like that. But you don't have to know it when you start speaking, because the more you know, the more confusing it gets, and the more you're not willing to speak because you calculate too many things in your head. So to summarize everything, the first thing you should do is to get some basic 101 book or course where you can learn the basics. And in that book, you should be focusing on the most common irregular verbs, the most common regular verbs. And then after that, just focus on memorizing the conjunctions, focus on making sentences, know how to make questions, memorize all the question words, know the 4 main tenses, the I did, the I am, the I used to, the I am going to tenses, and know all the important grammars, like the basic grammars, like the negation, like how to compare things, like the possessive, and few other grammar points from the basic book, and start writing your own story. Now you should also know how to use the reflexive verbs and to write a story about your daily routine. So after you have all that knowledge, you should move on to the French only video where you're learning French through French and not a French explained in English. And the most important thing is to go and talk to people. Alright guys, thank you so much for watching this video. I'm going to put all the links of stuff that I talked about in the description, so please go and check it out. I hope that this video has helped you to learn French better and to be able to talk to people as soon as possible. So I will see you in the next video. Thank you. Bye.